Ivan Robert Marco Milat was a name that would come to cast a long and chilling shadow over the Australian landscape, forever altering the nation's perception of safety and innocence. To the outside world, he was a road worker, one of many siblings in a large, boisterous family. He was known for his physical strength, his distinctive moustache, and a seemingly ordinary existence on the outskirts of Sydney. But, beneath this unremarkable surface lurked a predator of unimaginable cruelty. Milat would become infamous as the backpacker killer, the man responsible for a series of brutal murders that terrorized the country and captured the world's attention. His name is now synonymous with one of the darkest chapters in Australian criminal history. The crimes Milat committed were particularly heinous because they targeted the most vulnerable of travellers' young backpackers, both from overseas and within Australia, who were hitchhiking their way through the scenic countryside. These individuals were drawn by the promise of adventure, seeking to experience the vast beauty of the continent. Instead, they met a horrific fate in the dense wilderness of the Belanglo State Forest, a pine plantation southwest of Sydney. Between 1989 and 1993, Milat lured at least 7 young people into his vehicle, drove them into the secluded forest, and subjected them to unspeakable acts of violence before ending their lives. The discovery of their bodies would unravel a tale of calculated evil that left a permanent scar on the national psyche. The backpacker murders, as they came to be known, were a brutal affront to the Australian way of life. The country had long prided itself on being a safe and welcoming destination for travellers from all corners of the globe. The idea that a serial killer was preying on these unsuspecting visitors along one of the country's busiest highways was deeply unsettling. The case sparked one of the largest and most complex police investigations in Australian history, involving hundreds of officers, forensic experts, and international cooperation. The search for the killer became a national obsession, fueled by media speculation and a growing sense of public fear. When the trail finally led to Ivan Milat, the details that emerged would prove to be more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. Ultimately, Ivan Milat was convicted for the murders of 7 people, though many investigators and experts believe his victim count is likely much higher. His reign of terror was defined not just by the act of killing, but by the prolonged and sadistic torture he inflicted upon his victims. He was a monster hiding in plain sight, a predator who used the open road as his hunting ground and the isolated bushland as his killing field. The story of Ivan Milat is not just a chronicle of his crimes, but also a testament to the resilience of those who survived him, the dedication of the investigators who brought him to justice, and the enduring memory of the young lives he so senselessly destroyed. His legacy is one of fear, but also one of caution, forever changing the way Australians view the shadows that can linger on the edges of their sunburnt country. Ivan Milat was born on December 27, 1944, in Guildford, a suburb of Sydney. He was the 5th of 14 children born to Stjepan Stephen Milat, a Croatian immigrant, and Margaret Milat, an Australian-born woman. The Milat household was notoriously chaotic and violent. Stjepan was a strict and often brutal disciplinarian, and the children grew up in an environment where aggression and lawlessness were commonplace. From a young age, Ivan and his siblings developed a reputation in their community for being troublemakers. They were known for petty theft, fighting, and a general disregard for authority, forming a tight-knit clan that was fiercely loyal to one another and deeply suspicious of outsiders. This upbringing undoubtedly shaped Ivan's worldview, instilling in him a sense of entitlement and a belief that he could operate outside the rules of society. His criminal record began in his teenage years. By the age of 17, Milat was already known to police, with charges ranging from breaking and entering to car theft. His early forays into crime were often committed with his brothers, particularly Richard, who would also lead a life of criminality. In 1962, he was sentenced to a boys' home for theft, and his criminal activities only escalated upon his release. He developed a fascination with weapons, a trait that would become a horrifying hallmark of his later crimes. Friends and acquaintances from this period would later recall his obsession with guns and knives, and his penchant for bragging about his supposed toughness and survival skills. This early pattern of escalating violence and a growing obsession with weaponry painted a clear picture of a man on a dangerous trajectory. A significant event in his early criminal career occurred in 1971, when he was charged with the abduction and rape of 2 female hitchhikers. The circumstances of this crime were eerily similar to the methods he would later employ as the backpacker killer. He picked up the 2 women, threatened them with a knife, and drove them into the bush. However, in a stroke of luck for the victims and a failure of the justice system, Milat's lawyer successfully argued that the evidence was contradictory. The charges were ultimately dismissed, and Milat walked free. This event was a critical turning point. It not only demonstrated his predatory inclinations, but also likely emboldened him, reinforcing the belief that he could commit such acts and get away with them. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, Milat maintained a facade of normalcy. He worked various manual labor jobs, most notably as a road worker for the Department of Main Roads, a job that gave him an intimate knowledge of the highways and backroads of New South Wales. He married, had a child, and later divorced. To his colleagues, he was just Ivan, a hard worker who kept to himself. But behind this mask, his criminal tendencies and violent fantasies continued to fester. He was involved in armed robberies and was known within his family for his volatile temper and controlling nature. This dual existence allowed him to blend into society while secretly honing the skills and indulging the dark impulses that would eventually lead him to the Belanglo State Forest. The official list of Ivan Milat's victims comprises 7 young people, all of whom vanished while hitchhiking south of Sydney between 1989 and 1992. The first to disappear were a young Australian couple from Melbourne, Deborah Everest, 19, and James Gibson, 19. They were last seen on December 30th, 1989, near a highway interchange in Sydney, planning to hitchhike to a music festival near Albury. Their disappearance was a mystery, one of many missing person cases that at the time were not connected. For years, their families held on to hope, searching for answers that would not come until their remains were discovered deep within the Belanglo State Forest. Their journey of youthful adventure had ended in a place of unimaginable terror, marking the beginning of Milat's killing spree. The next victims were international travelers, a hallmark of Milat's predatory pattern. In February 1990, Simone Schmidl, a 21-year-old German backpacker, vanished. She had been planning to hitchhike from Sydney to Melbourne. Her mother, who had been expecting a call, grew increasingly worried when Simone never made contact. Despite her family's desperate pleas and inquiries, no trace of her was found. Her disappearance highlighted the vulnerability of solo travelers in a foreign land. Simone's case, like those of Deborah and James, went cold, leaving her loved ones in a painful limbo of not knowing her fate. She had become another victim of the hidden predator stalking the Hume Highway. The disappearances continued into 1991. In April, another German couple, Gabor Neugebauer, 21, and Anja Habschied, 20, went missing. They were also last seen intending to hitchhike south from Sydney, heading towards Mildura. When they failed to make contact with their families back in Germany, they were reported missing. Their case added to the growing number of unsolved disappearances involving young travellers in the region. By this point, a disturbing pattern was beginning to emerge, though the connections were not yet officially made by law enforcement. The Hume Highway, a major artery connecting Australia's 2 largest cities, was becoming a corridor of fear, a place where the promise of travel could lead to a dark and unknown end. The final known victims were 2 British backpackers, Caroline Clark, 21, and Joanne Walters, 22. The 2 friends had been travelling together and were last seen in April 1992 in King's Cross, Sydney's notorious red light district, preparing to hitchhike south to find fruit-picking work. Joanne Walters, a childcare worker from Wales, and Caroline Clark, a nanny from England, were on the adventure of a lifetime. Their failure to contact their families, who they had been in regular touch with, raised immediate alarms. Their parents flew to Australia to aid in the search, generating significant media attention. It was the discovery of their bodies 5 months later that would finally trigger the massive police investigation and lead to the uncovering of the other victims, transforming a series of individual missing person cases into the hunt for a serial killer. The grim discoveries in the Belanglo State Forest began on September 19, 1992. A group of orienteers, navigating through a remote part of the forest, stumbled upon a decaying human corpse partially hidden under a pile of leaves and branches. Police were called to the scene, and the area was cordoned off. The body was later identified as that of Joanne Walters, one of the missing British backpackers. The forensic examination revealed a horrifying truth. She had been stabbed multiple times with extreme force. The brutality of the attack was immediately apparent. Just 1 day later, during a more thorough search of the area, investigators found a second body nearby. It was that of her friend, Caroline Clark. She had been shot 10 times in the head, as if used for target practice. The nature of their deaths confirmed police fears. A sadistic killer was at work. The discovery of the 2 British women prompted the formation of Task Force Air, a massive police operation dedicated to solving the murders. Investigators began a meticulous grid search of the vast Belanglo State Forest, a sprawling and dense pine plantation that was notoriously difficult to navigate. The search was painstaking and emotionally draining for the officers involved. Over a year later, in October 1993, their grim work yielded more results. A man searching for firewood discovered a human skull and thigh bone in another remote section of the forest, several kilometers from where the British women were found. Dental records soon confirmed the remains belonged to Deborah Everest, who had vanished with her boyfriend, James Gibson, nearly 4 years earlier. Just a few days after Everest's remains were found, police searching the same vicinity discovered the skeleton of James Gibson. The scene was one of calculated violence. His body showed evidence of multiple deep stab wounds that had severed his spinal cord. The sheer power required for such injuries pointed to a killer of significant physical strength. The way the bodies were positioned and partially concealed suggested a ritualistic element to the crimes. The killer had taken his time, creating shallow graves for his victims and covering them with forest debris. This methodical approach indicated a killer who was comfortable and familiar with this dark, isolated environment, using it as his personal dumping ground. The final 3 victims were discovered in November 1993, bringing the total to 7. The remains of Simone Schmidl were found first, her skeleton bearing numerous stab wounds. Shortly thereafter, the bodies of Gabor Neugebauer and Anja Habschied were unearthed in shallow graves nearby. They had been subjected to similar levels of extreme violence. Gabor had been shot in the head multiple times, while Anja had been decapitated. At several of the crime scenes, police found .22 caliber shell casings, the same type of ammunition used in multiple attacks. They also noted that the victims' bodies were often found with their hands behind their backs, suggesting they had been bound. The forest had given up its secrets, revealing a serial killer's horrifying playground of torture and death. The breakthrough in the perplexing and terrifying case came from an unlikely source, thousands of miles away in Great Britain. A young man named Paul Onions had been closely following the news reports about the bodies discovered in the Belanglo State Forest. The details of the case struck a chilling chord with him, bringing back a terrifying memory from his own backpacking trip to Australia. On January 25, 1990, Onions had been hitchhiking south from Sydney, trying to get to Canberra. He was picked up near the Casula train station by a man driving a light-coloured four-wheel drive vehicle. The driver introduced himself as Bill and seemed friendly enough at first, engaging in casual conversation about his work and family. As they drove south along the Hume Highway, the driver's demeanor began to change. He started making unsettling comments and asking increasingly personal and strange questions. As they approached the turnoff for the Belanglo State Forest, Bill pulled the vehicle over, claiming he wanted to get a cassette tape from the back. It was at this moment that Paul Onion's survival instincts kicked in. He saw the driver pull out a rope and a gun. Realizing he was in grave danger, Onions unbuckled his seatbelt, threw open the car door, and bolted into the path of oncoming traffic on the busy highway. The man yelled at him to come back, but Onions kept running for his life, frantically trying to flag down a car. Miraculously, a passing vehicle driven by a local woman named Joanne Berry stopped for him. With her 5 children in the car, she saw the terrified young man and the man with the gun chasing him. She pulled over and Onions scrambled into her vehicle, hysterically explaining what had just happened. They drove directly to the nearest police station in Belanglo, where a shaken Paul Onions gave a detailed statement about his attacker and the vehicle. At the time, with no bodies yet discovered, the incident was treated as an attempted robbery or assault. Although a report was filed, no suspect was identified, and the case went cold. Onions returned to Britain, forever haunted by his narrow escape from the man he knew only as Bill. In 1994, after reading about the Belanglo discoveries, Paul Onions realized the profound significance of his encounter. He knew his attacker was the killer. He contacted the New South Wales police and recounted his story to Task Force Air. The investigators immediately recognized the importance of his information. They flew him back to Australia, where he was shown a series of photographs of potential suspects. Without hesitation, Onions pointed to the picture of a man with a distinctive, droopy moustache. The man he identified was Ivan Robert Marco Milat. His positive identification provided the police with the crucial link they had been searching for, transforming Milat from one of many persons of interest into their prime suspect. Paul Onions wasn't just a witness, he was a survivor, the one who got away, and his testimony would be the key to unlocking the entire case. With Paul Onion's positive identification, Ivan Milat became the primary focus of Task Force Air. The police began a period of intense surveillance on him, tracking his movements, monitoring his phone calls, and gathering information about his habits and associates. They learned about his obsession with guns and his extensive knowledge of the Belanglo State Forest, where he had often gone hunting and camping. The pieces of the puzzle were rapidly falling into place. The description of the vehicle given by Onions matched a 4-wheel drive that Milat had owned around the time of the attacks. Armed with this growing mountain of circumstantial evidence and Onion's direct testimony, police were finally ready to make their move. On the morning of May 22, 1994, more than 50 heavily armed police officers stormed Ivan Milat's home in Eagle Vale, a suburb in southwestern Sydney. The raid was dramatic and executed with precision, as police feared Milat was dangerous and heavily armed. Inside the house, they found a chilling arsenal of weapons, but more importantly, they found what they called an Aladdin's cave of evidence, directly linking Milat to the murdered backpackers. Hidden throughout his house, in wall cavities and behind cupboards, were personal belongings of the victims. They found camping equipment, cameras, clothing, and sleeping bags that belonged to Simone Schmiedel, Anja Habschied, Gabor Neugebauer, and others. The discoveries were sickeningly concrete proof of his guilt. The forensic evidence gathered from Milat's property was overwhelming. Among the most damning finds were parts of a .22 caliber Ruger 1022 rifle, the same type of weapon used to kill several of the victims. Ballistic tests would later match this weapon to shell casings found at the crime scenes. Police also found a camera belonging to Caroline Clark and a water bottle and tent that had belonged to Gabor Neugebauer and Anja Habschied. The sheer volume of trophies Milat had kept from his victims was staggering. It demonstrated a level of arrogance and a belief that he would never be caught. For the investigators, it was the final, undeniable confirmation that they had their man. Ivan Milat was arrested and charged with the 7 backpacker murders. Milat's trial began in March 1996 and lasted for 15 weeks. The prosecution, led by Mark Tedeschi QC, presented a powerful case built upon 3 pillars: Paul Onion's eyewitness testimony, the mountain of physical evidence found in Milat's home, and the ballistic evidence connecting his rifle to the murders. The defense team attempted to shift the blame onto other members of the Milat family, particularly his brothers Richard and Walter, suggesting that one of them could have been the killer and framed Ivan. However, the jury was not swayed. On July 27, 1996, after 3 days of deliberation, the jury found Ivan Milat guilty on all counts. He was convicted of 7 murders and the abduction of Paul Onions. He was sentenced to 7 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, ensuring he would die in prison. Upon his conviction, Ivan Milat was sent to Maitland Jail, a maximum security prison. From the moment he was incarcerated, he maintained his innocence, embarking on a decades-long campaign of defiance against the justice system. He filed numerous appeals, all of which were dismissed. He insisted he had been framed, often blaming his own family for his predicament. His time in prison was marked by disruptive and often violent behavior. He was not a model prisoner. Instead, he was a constant source of trouble for correctional authorities. His notoriety as the backpacker killer made him a high-profile and high-risk inmate, requiring constant and expensive security measures to manage him. Milat's quest for attention and his refusal to accept his fate led to several shocking acts of self-harm. In 1997, he attempted to escape from Maitland Jail alongside another convicted murderer. The plan was foiled, and he was transferred to the state's new super-maximum security facility at Goulburn. There, his protests continued. In 2009, he severed his own little finger with a plastic knife, intending to mail it to the High Court of Australia to force an appeal. He was treated in the hospital and returned to his cell. In 2011, he went on a hunger strike, losing 25 kilograms in another desperate bid to get a PlayStation as a bargaining chip for a new trial. Each act was a calculated move to keep himself in the public eye and disrupt the prison system. Throughout his years in prison, investigators and the victims' families repeatedly pleaded with Milat to confess and reveal the location of any other bodies. They hoped he might show a shred of remorse or provide closure to other families of missing persons whose cases bore similarities to his crimes. But Milat remained steadfast in his denials. He was arrogant and contemptuous until the very end, playing cruel games with the police and the media. He would write cryptic letters, hinting at knowledge, but never revealing anything concrete. His silence was another form of torture for those who suspected he had killed more than the 7 victims for which he was convicted. He held all the answers, and he took a sadistic pleasure in withholding them. In early 2019, Ivan Milat was diagnosed with terminal esophageal and stomach cancer. As his health rapidly deteriorated, he was transferred between Goulburn's Supermax prison and the secure wing of a Sydney hospital. Even in his final days, frail and bedridden, he refused to confess. Police detectives made one last attempt to elicit a confession from him on his deathbed, but he met their questions with the same defiant silence he had maintained for over 2 decades. On October 27, 2019, at the age of 74, Ivan Milat died in the hospital at Long Bay Correctional Complex. He took his secrets to the grave, leaving behind a legacy of unanswered questions and ensuring that the full, horrifying scope of his crimes may never be known. The methods Ivan Milat employed were a terrifying combination of charm, deception, and overwhelming violence. His hunting ground was the Hume Highway, a place teeming with his preferred prey, young, trusting hitchhikers. He would present himself as a friendly and helpful local, a regular bloke offering a ride. His victims, often tired and eager to get to their next destination, would see no reason to distrust the mustachioed man in the 4-wheel drive. This initial act of feigned kindness was the first step in his predatory ritual. Once his victims were in his vehicle and far from public view, the friendly facade would drop and the true horror would begin. He used his knowledge of the road network to quickly divert them from the main highway into the isolating wilderness of the Belanglo State Forest. Once inside the forest, a place he knew intimately, Milat had complete control. The isolation of the location meant that his victims' screams would go unheard. Here, he subjected them to prolonged periods of terror and torture. The forensic evidence found on the bodies tells a chilling story of his sadism. He would bind his victims, often using rope in a complex knot, and subject them to a variety of assaults. The attacks were not quick, they were drawn out. Evidence suggests he would engage in what investigators called psychosadistic acts, designed to inflict maximum fear and pain before death. He used his victims for sport, a fact made horrifyingly clear by the multiple stab wounds, decapitation, and the use of Caroline Clark's body for target practice. The sheer brutality of the crimes was what shocked Australia and the world. Milat's attacks were characterized by overkill, a level of violence that went far beyond what was necessary to simply end a life. The deep, powerful stab wounds, some of which severed the spinal cord, indicated a frenzied rage and immense physical strength. He used a combination of weapons, including knives and a .22 caliber rifle, suggesting he came prepared for his deadly encounters. The discovery that he had kept personal belongings of his victims as trophies added another layer of psychopathy to his profile. These were not just souvenirs, they were symbols of his power and conquest, items he could use to relive the thrill of the hunt and the kill. This calculated and sadistic methodology is what set the backpacker murders apart from other crimes. It wasn't just murder, it was a ritual of domination and terror. Milat didn't just want to kill his victims, he wanted to terrorize and dehumanize them first. The fact that he could carry out these horrific acts over a period of several years, all while maintaining a seemingly normal life as a road worker, speaks to his chilling ability to compartmentalize his life. He was a monster who wore a mask of normalcy, a predator who expertly blended into the very society he preyed upon. The shocking nature of his crimes lay not only in their violence, but in the terrifying realization that such evil could exist just beneath the surface of everyday life. The conviction of Ivan Milat did not close the book on the backpacker murders. Instead, it left behind a host of unsettling questions that continue to haunt investigators and the Australian public. One of the most persistent questions is whether Milat was responsible for more deaths. The 7 murders for which he was convicted occurred in a relatively short time frame, from 1989 to 1992. However, Milat's history of violence and his predatory behaviour began decades earlier. Police have long suspected that he may have been involved in numerous other unsolved disappearances and murders dating back to the 1970s. His work as a road crew employee gave him access to vast remote areas across New South Wales, providing ample opportunity and secluded locations to commit and conceal other crimes. The theory that Milat had accomplices is another enduring aspect of his dark legacy. The sheer logistics of overpowering, controlling, and murdering 2 people at once, as he did with several of the couples, has led many to believe he did not always act alone. Suspicion has often fallen on other members of the Milat family, a clan known for its clannish loyalty and criminal history. During the trial, his defense team even tried to pin the blame on his brothers. While no one else was ever charged in connection with the Belanglo murders, the possibility that one or more family members knew about, or even participated in, the crimes remains a deeply disturbing and unresolved issue. Milat's silence on this matter means the full truth may never be known. The impact of the Milat case on Australia was profound and lasting. It shattered the nation's sense of security and innocence, particularly the cherished tradition of hitchhiking. What was once seen as a rite of passage for young adventurers became an act fraught with peril. The phrase "don't go to Belanglo" entered the national lexicon as a warning. The murders forced a change in public consciousness, fostering a greater sense of caution and a loss of trust that has lingered for decades. For a country that prided itself on its friendliness and open spaces, the realization that a monster was hunting on its highways was a brutal awakening. The case served as a dark reminder that evil could lurk in the most ordinary of places. Ivan Milat's crimes have left an indelible mark on Australian pop culture and true crime history. The story has been the subject of numerous books, documentaries, and a highly successful television miniseries, Catching Milat. The Belanglo State Forest itself has become a place of dark tourism, drawing curiosity seekers despite its gruesome history. But beyond the media fascination, the true legacy of Ivan Milat lies in the enduring pain of the victims' families and the chilling memory of the 7 young lives he so brutally extinguished. He remains Australia's most notorious serial killer, a boogeyman figure whose name is a byword for pure evil. His story is a cautionary tale, a permanent scar on the Australian psyche, and a somber memorial to the victims whose journeys ended in that dark forest.